Joining us now for all of the oil-related implications from this story, IHS Markit Vice Chairman Dan Yergin. Can I say I'm glad we started developing some of our own domestic resources, Dan? Is that, that's a good thing, is it not?
Well, yeah, it certainly changed, and not some. We're the world's largest oil producer, and I mean, if we had been where we were 10 years ago, this would have been a much more panicky situation than it is today. Still, of course, it's the biggest hit. It's the biggest disruption to world oil supplies that's ever occurred.
In one fell swoop, I guess. What about China and the effect it could have on China's economy?
Well, China imports much more oil than we do. We import less than 15%. They import 75%. And 80% of Saudi oil exports actually go to the major Asian countries. So they're the ones that are really going to have to scramble to replace supplies right now. We import about 500,000 barrels a day of Saudi oil. They import like 1.5 million barrels a day of Saudi oil.
I have seen you, Yergin, when there are CEOs at the White House, suddenly you pop up there. So you've got some connections. What do you know about what we know about who's responsible? Anything that's not being reported?
Well, I think that the comments by Secretary Pompeo probably reflect what's thought here. I mean, you hear this term north by northwest. That, in other words, these didn't come from Yemen. It would be a very long distance from Yemen. There had been a thought that they'd come from Iraq, but now, you know, at least Secretary Pompeo seems to be saying that they came from Iran. And if that's the case, it makes a bad situation even worse, because there's a question, what's going to be the response? I think the oil market is actually, there's a lot of supply there. The statements that they've made about the Strategic Petroleum Reserve have been very helpful, but there's a question, what comes next?
So, Dan, so you're willing, what do you think? How sure are you it's Iran? Would you say you're...
Well, I don't have privy to the intelligence.
Let's say it was Iran. And remember, there's been the other incidents with the tankers, and all these things are disrupting. You know, they're all aimed at sort of a similar thing, right?
Well, and this, of course, I mean, it's one thing to go after a tanker. Here, it's basically a third of the entire volume that passes through the Strait of Hormuz. That's the question.
What would the end game be for Iran to...
That is a very good question. I mean, was this an effort to disrupt the possibility of President Trump and President Rouhani meeting next week in New York? That's a possibility. But on the other hand, something like this wouldn't have been done without the highest authority.
Yeah, I mean, if they are behind it, doesn't it point to just the idea that they are feeling more and more cornered by the economic sanctions to this point and getting more?
That's right. And they've said, why should Saudi Arabia take our market share? Why should we do this? In fact, it leaves us now that the only spare capacity in the world is actually Iranian oil, that if you need large volumes. I should say, however, the world is pretty well supplied with oil to handle this situation.
And I guess that also begs the question, to what depth should the United States even get involved in this? Why, you know, I understand we have our own issues with Iran. Does this demand that we retaliate or not?
Well, I think the president has indicated in some way, and this sort of goes to the heart of one of his whole things about Iran, but I think the Saudis have to decide also where this came from. If it is Iran, then the question, it's hard to believe that there's not going to be some kind of response. And I think the oil market will adjust to the fact that probably supplies are okay, the system, the market's flexible, but the question that will hover over it will be two. How long does it take to repair the facility, and what happens next?
I mean, we need to choose a side, I guess, too. And it's harder for us to choose Saudi Arabia now. We just went through September 11th memorials. And then you got Khashoggi. But I just don't... And we're making... It seems like we're making some sort of... we're trying to approach Iran to try to...
Well, we were up until early Saturday morning or late Friday night, and it certainly looked like there was both sides wanted to get out of it, but this, just transforms the situation. I mean, there's really never been anything like this before.
Is this going to, by the way, is this going to bind us closer to Saudi Arabia, do you think?
Well, I think it will. I think, it is, despite all the problems, it is one of our two major allies in the region. And so, I'm sure there'll be a lot of defense cooperation. They're a big buyer of our arms. But now the question is, how do you maintain security? And I think we're in a new era where there's a risk premium on oil because the demonstration of this kind of vulnerability.
And the Middle East, just in itself. I mean, last week the president also tweeting about how they're considering this idea of an agreement with Israel to attack anybody that attacks Israel. I mean, there's so much happening in the Middle East right now that this obviously...
Yeah. And on top of that, there's been this kind of low-level war already taking place between Israel and Iran in Syria, in Iraq, in Lebanon. So this is there's a level of tension that, of course, has not been reflected in oil prices until this happened, and this now pulls up those oil prices.